Hello, I once showed you some beautiful coloured drawings by Juliet Jeffrey in a book about the Romany Fair, poems about the great Romany Fair at Appleby up in the Fells. Well, today I've got some of her watercolours. This one I love. It's a picture of the old way of gypsy life, up a green lane, miles from anywhere, family of travellers settled in their barrel-top wagons. You can feel the quiet of it and the slow rhythm of living that way. And she knows that life very well indeed, for two reasons. First of all, because she has a passion to paint it and has done so better than anybody else I know. And secondly, because she's married to somebody who I find can tell me more about gypsy life than anybody else. If you want to find them, Juliet and her husband's name is Peter Ingram, she's now Juliet Ingram, you have to go to this famous place. This is perhaps the most famous wood in English countryside, at any rate to naturalists, because this is Selborne, where Gilbert White wrote his famous diary, which was almost the foundation of British natural history, and these are the Hanger Woods, which are mentioned so often in Gilbert White's diary. And down at the bottom of the Hanger Woods is the high street of the little old town of Selborne, where Gilbert White's house was, now a museum to him. And halfway along the high street there's a little yard, craftsman's yard, that has been occupied through history by local builders, by wheelwrights and so on, and now is occupied by Peter Ingram. And it's a place that I love to go to, and he's a man I love to hear talking about gypsy life, because he really can tell me about it. In his house next door, his cottage next door, he's got a bookcase with more books about gypsy life and gypsy law than I've ever seen before. Some of them very old, earlier than any I've seen before. And he surrounds himself with all the impedimenta of gypsy life. The bantams, which always travelled with the gypsies because they'd get their own living in the woods and other people's farmyards and lay a few eggs and then move on in a little basket in the van. It was the little girl's job of the family, probably a little 5-year-old girl. Everybody had a job when the wagons moved, and I talked to an old lady who said when she was 5 years old her job was to catch up the bantams, and she got so she could call them and they would come out of the woods to her. And down in the corner here there's the kettle iron, the famous crook iron on which the gypsy kettle hang, and which was a famous weapon. One gypsy said to me, you grabbed the kettle iron when the knives came through the tents. Well, we'll put the kettle on the kettle iron, because that's how Peter makes his tea in the yard, because it amuses him to do so. And it makes a good smoky cup of tea too. Nothing better. Peter, you see, is one of probably 3 or 4 people in England, I doubt if there are more, who still have the old skill of painting the road wagons, what were called the vardos in the Romany language. But that was after the gypsies adopted them, because the whole history of gypsy wagons is only 100 years old. Originally they were used by the travelling showman in early Dickens' time. These wagons were occupied by travelling show people. The gypsies were still in bender tents made over hoops of hazel, carried on flat carts, and in fact the gypsies in the New Forest were in bender tents up to the 1920s. But really, hardly more than 100 years ago, the gypsies adopted the showman's wagon and started to live their lives in it, making almost everything for themselves. Look at that marvellous hanging basket, just tacked together out of strips of wood. They clip strips of hazel out of the hedge and make themselves a hanging basket, just as good as the one that you would buy at the garden centre. And Peter's workshop is a treasure house of gypsy things, actually. And like every man's workshop, he knows where everything is, and if anybody were to tidy it for him, he'd be ruined. There must be 500 different colours that have been used in traditional patterns on traditional vans of the vans that he's repainted, some of which are famous. You've probably seen them in museums. And his tools, some of the original tools come from the old wagon builders. There weren't so many of them. There were builders at Reading and at Bradford and at Burton, and 1 or 2 famous ones in Yorkshire. There's his lathe, which turns the spindles, which are an essential part of some of the Vardo designs, and there he's been working on some window shutters. And those are the benders, the hoops that hold the barrel top wagons up. And they made these, as he still makes them, by leaving them in the stream till they were wet and then driving pegs in the ground, bending around one set of pegs and pegging them up with another set of pegs and leaving there in the sun till they dried and took their new shape. Everything here is in this style, even a birthday announcement that he did for a friend. And there's one of the old baskets in which the Bantams went when they travelled. And the little old iron stove's very hard to get hold of nowadays, but he collects these things when he can, and the water pot is marvellous Victorian elaboration, to which the gypsies brought an oriental flourish of elaboration. This is a Burton wagon, the red one, and this is a Reading. There are many who say that Dunford's Reading was the finest van of all, and they are very precious among collectors. For me, the ironwork is as great as the woodwork. Often the wagon builders, there was one brother who was the wagon builder and the other brother was the blacksmith, and they worked together, and this ironwork was hand forged for each van in turn. This van, which is a fine Reading van, which needs real restoration, has been sent to Peter by a county museum, and he's going to do it up perfectly, and it'll be preserved forever there. It's got in it one of the real gypsy treasures, which is a Colchester stove. This is the earliest and most loved of the wagon stoves. Very rare nowadays. And of course the trouble with these wagons is that it was a gypsy custom to burn the wagon when the owner died, just as the Vikings burned their ships. They would put the whole of a lifetime's earnings into a wagon, all wearing old clothes and bothering with few other possessions. They put the whole of a lifetime's earnings into this, and then burnt it ceremoniously when the owner died. So many of them have gone, and those that remain to be preserved have become precious, and those who can do it, as I say, are very few, and Peter is one of the best known of them. You see him putting the size on there. Now there is a square-topped bow-top wagon, and look at the gold on it. Sometimes they would come along and say, put more gold on it, put more gold on it. And he has done up wagons for collectors and for exhibitions which have got 300 pounds of gold leaf on them. You see, he puts the size on first, and then he takes book after book of the gold leaf, and taps it into place, presses it into place. Dozens and dozens and dozens of little gold carvings. Each, you'll notice, carved originally to take some of the weight out, because the great of the thing about these these wagons, was not only that they were enormously strong and would stand the rattle of the roads, but they were as light as they could be made and still be strong. Finally, he dusts it off. And there's another bit of gold, and this is his treasure. This is a barrel top which is Peter's own. I don't think anybody collector could buy this off him, because it's made by the man who he believes was the greatest wagon builder of all. And he's done it up to complete perfection with every one of the possessions that it would have contained in the days when it was on the road, still in place. You see the carpet, felt, and then the silk which lines the canvas roof and gives it insulation, and the bed where the two side doors open and the whole bed itself pulls forward. Look at the gold carving on that bed, and that becomes a double bed, and underneath a couple of drawers. There are drawers everywhere, and below, when these two doors open at night, where the tiny children slept. The bigger children would sleep out in a tent or in fine weather under the wagon, but that's where the little ones slept in their infancy. And the Crown Derby and the Capodimonte, their two favorite kinds of china, which were packed away religiously every time the wagon moved. And the silver rose bowls. And the long dogs and the horses are the sacred animals, so to speak, of the gypsy life. And this is the Princess stove, one of the most successful ones. And what I like about it is there's marvelous blue and white Delft enamel iron plates behind it. The drawers fitting perfectly. And imagine how that cabinet building must have been done if they were going to go on working those drawers smoothly after thousands of miles of travel. And there is the man who built it, William Wright, in Peter's opinion, the greatest wagon builder of them all. And the picture of the original inhabitants, with one interesting thing about it. See the pipes, which are the symbol of status for the senior women. It's quite beautiful, this wagon, and it's been done up by Peter utterly perfectly. All the carvings, horses and grapes and acantha sleeves, they were all done by special carvers. I believe the first famous of them was at Sheffield, and they were ordered and built onto the van. And there are the spindles, which he turns on his lathe if they need restoring. And that is not for putting the bantams in, as some people believe. That's usually called the halter box, because that is where they threw harness, which they wanted to get hold of quickly. And the art of taking out the extra wood in order to produce lightness was developed into a perfect form of decoration. Look at that rear axle and the kettle box behind it. And the lock itself, where the wagon turns, every one of those lightened with carving, with ram's horn ends. There are precious few of these things left, and it's marvelous that such as do remain, the best of them, are preserved by a man like this. In the end, I suppose, every one of them will be in a museum or in the hands of a private collector, but in the meanwhile, there's still work for him to do, and he does it freehand. Look at the whole of that scrolling. There isn't a drawing done in advance. The gold is done freehand, and then he follows round freehand with another color, and then probably round with another. A lot of this life is dead now, but the spirit of it remains. And while Peter is perfectly preserving his past, Juliet, his wife, is recording the extraordinary present, the garish star vans at Appleby Fair, all stainless steel, but surrounded still by the goats and the long dogs. They're all right, it's
Out
just...
of town, reach R1494, take 1, part 2. It's when somebody else...
Now for another bit of know-how. You found me trying to pluck a chicken the other day, and I said I hated it, and I hated it because I was no good at it, and I was no good at it because when I was young it was women's work. when a farmer's wife close to me said, I'll give you a lesson, I said, don't give me a lesson. I don't want to be any good at it, thanks very much. But what you can do is you can give a lesson to all the other people who've taken up country life and are feeling like survival, because a lot of people think that chickens just come to them without anybody doing any work, and they will turn aside for the preparations for a beef steak or a chicken. However, if you're going to live a country life, you better be able to do it. So we asked Mrs. Winter if we could watch her plucking and dressing a chicken. Well, her son's just killed it. We didn't show you that, thought it might upset you. And because his fingers are stronger than hers, he's pulling out the primary wing feathers for her and the tail feathers, because she says her fingers are not as strong as they used to be. And then he'll hand it over to her, because it must be plucked as soon as it's dead. Now she'll start on the back. At least he's pulled most of the back off, so she's gone at the breath. And it's short, sharp jerks while the bird is still warm. If that bird begins to cool, then the skin will tear. The bird has either got to be plucked immediately it's killed, or it can be left till it's cold. And the former is preferable if you want to pluck it nice and clean. She's gone down the back and down the breast, and now the sides between the back and the breast. And next you go to the legs. If you want to know how long this took her, I'll tell you. It took her about 8 minutes, and she said she used to be much faster in the days when her fingers were stronger. So it's first the back, then the breast, then the legs, and I was taught you did the wings next and then the tail, but she's doing it, seems to be doing it in the opposite order. And the tail feathers are the dangerous ones. You've got to pluck those singly, or you will get tears. And then she locks the wings back, you see. Turns the end joint of the wing. I thought, yes, she is going to do it. There you are. She locks the wing back like that, both sides. And the few stubs of half-grown feathers have to come out singly. It will have occurred to you, even though you only know about eating chickens already, that this is quite a chicken. And I tell you it is. They produce some beautiful ones here, and this is a bird as big as the average small turkey, and I may say, not so dry, and a darn sight better flavor. Now she's going to take the whiskers off it. She does this just with a little bit of methylated spirit in a saucer. She'll singe the whiskers off it. Open the wings up again, and then you notice, in order that the flame can get at the whiskers. So that is the bird, plucked, but not yet drawn or cleaned and dressed. And I suspect that bird was knocking on 14 pounds at the point where her son brought it in. There they are, there the wings go back again. We'll weigh it and find out what it weighs undressed, because this bird will have to hang now. It wants to hang for 1, 2, in cold weather 3 days if it's going to have any flavour. It's a grave mistake to, there we are. If I'm not mistaken, that's just between 12 and 13 pounds. Now, when the bird has hung for 2 or 3 days, it'll be ready to dress. If it's dressed before that, it won't have any flavour. The legs come off just about ½ an inch below the joint, and she does that by cracking the bone with an old pair of garden secateurs. And now it has to be approached from each end in turn. The neck end, she runs a long cut down the back of the neck, open up the whole of the neck right the way down, like splitting a tube. And that enables her to open that up and cut the neck bone off right up against the rib cage. And then the neck will come out and be cut off at the top. And that, of course, will be kept, the neck, because that's an essential bit of giblets for making stock. A big favour. Then she cleans out the vessels of the neck. There's the neck cleaned out. And a long slanting cut. She does it to one side, from the tip of the breastbone right down to the vent. And then the vent is carefully cut out at the bottom. You got that? Legs chopped off first, then the neck, and then this long cut, and the vent taken out, and that enables her to pull all the rest of the bird's outside. This is what they call drawing. This is how a bird is drawn. There's a fine lot of fat inside this bird, actually. He's been very well fed. And from the trail that's drawn, she takes the liver and the kidney and the heart to add to the flavor-making things. And finally, she's making sure the lights are out. So that's the bird drawn, and when it comes to trussing it, it's trussed in such a way that it throws the breast up and gives it a good shape for market. And this she does with string and a trussing needle. A trussing needle is a long needle, the ring at one end and the eye at the tip. Now you can make one of these if you want to. You can make one of these, I discovered quite happily, by getting one of those shish kebab spits that they sell you in the ironmongers now for doing shish kebab on, and boring a hole in the flat tip of it, and you've got a trussing needle. So it goes right through, right inside the elbows like that, holding the legs well down. And then the string goes into the eye, and you pull it back through again. And then when you turn it over, that will tie the thighs right down tight. And then she ties the drumsticks to the parson's nose. Round the parson's nose, up round the drumsticks, and that pulls the whole bird together into its proper shape for the oven. And she leaves the wings locked like that. There are different styles of doing this. There are some people who tie the wings back to the body, but she leaves the wings just locked like that. And that's what my mother did. And the last trick of all is that the skin of the neck, you see, turns back and goes under the string which tied the legs down. And there it is, ready. It started off at knocking on 13 pounds. It was over 12 with the feathers on and the drawing. And now, what's happened when she's drawn it and trussed it? Well, just a fraction over 10 pounds. And she does 200 of those every Christmas, all reared on the farm, and people start booking them about 3 months ahead. So there's what I used to regard as woman's work, splendidly done efficiently by a woman, and as long as there's somebody to do it, I won't try myself. Cheerio.